In 1991, Maurice Ashley made history when he became the first Black Grandmaster in chess. But this is as good as it could get, because in the 25 years since then, no Black player has ever come close to becoming world champion. In fact, in the entire history of chess, there has never been a Black world champion, not in classical, rapid, or blitz. And if you look at the top 100 players, you can count the number of Black players on one hand. Oh, sorry, apologies. I meant on one finger. When you look at sports generally, Black athletes shine. If you look at sprinting, basketball, American football, their dominance is undeniable. But sit them across a chessboard and the story flips completely. So, why do Black players seem to struggle in chess? And is that belief really accurate? This video is not about declaring any race superior or inferior, but about what differences exist by race in chess and why. First, we'll look at whether white players actually dominate chess. Then, we'll check out the cultural differences at play and also look into the genetic differences, examining what the science actually says and doesn't say about racial variations in chess ability. So, let's get right into it. Firstly, are Black players really bad at chess? The answer is kind of, but it depends on what level of chess you are looking at. When we look at the very top, it is hard to ignore some obvious patterns. Out of the 17 undisputed world champions in history, 15 have been white, Europeans, or Russians. Today, less than 3% of grandmasters worldwide are Black, and among the top 100 ranked players in the world, there are none. This is the same for my YouTube channel. Less than 3% of people who watch this video subscribe to the channel, based on what I can see on my analytics. So please subscribe and be part of building a wider, more inclusive chess story. It is undeniable the dominance in chess is overwhelmingly white. Even when we look at the bottom, the demographics don't really change. At the lower competitive levels, Black players still don't dominate. The big breakthroughs have mostly come from countries like India and China, not from Black players. In chess, Russia and European players have completely crushed the world championship cycles for decades, with only rare exceptions. Almost every world champion in the last 100 years has come from that region. But flip to Africa or other Black nations and you get a completely different picture. At the 2022 Chess Olympiad, for example, none of the top performing teams came from Sub-Saharan Africa or any other Black nation. As if that isn't enough, Black players are also underrepresented in elite tournaments worldwide. In fact, less than 3% of titled players registered with FIDE are Black. Meanwhile, in India and China, chess is rapidly rising, producing dozens of world-class players and even recent world champions. Even if we look at women's chess, the story is the same, if not worse. As at today, there isn't a recognized Black female grandmaster in chess. Women's chess has historically been dominated by white and Eastern European players, and now China's Hu Yifan is likely the greatest female chess player of the modern era. Without any doubt, the demographics of that part of the game is shifting, but not towards Black people. That's enough of showing some of the racial patterns in chess. Now, let's dig into why they exist at all. One of the first things to look at is the cultural factor that shaped the racial landscape of chess. It is not as simple as saying Black players are just naturally bad at it. In the early 20th century, chess was largely closed off to much of the world outside Europe and the Soviet Union. For this channel, it is the opposite. It is open to everybody, but somehow, some of you haven't yet subscribed. So please, step inside the world where every story has a place by subscribing to my channel and get me to 2K. Thank you very much. When that changed, we saw just how much talent had been sidelined. Countries like India and China began producing prodigies, and integration reshaped the competitive landscape. As chess became more accessible, it also became a cultural touchstone in certain regions. In Russia, for example, all you really needed to get better was a board. It was easy to find in schools, homes, and clubs, and also a set of pieces, which was not expensive as well. The game doesn't require expensive equipment or large facilities in order to play in these regions. Apart from that, we also have the economic and political incentive. In the Soviet Union, for example, chess wasn't just a pastime, it was a career, a way to rise in status, even a weapon in the Cold War. Governments and communities invested in their players, seeing them as symbols of national pride. So it is clear that in some societies, chess has always been woven into the very fabric of daily life. But Black communities never had that same cultural or institutional support for chess. The investment, the infrastructure, the role models, they simply weren't there. And without that foundation, it is no surprise that Black players have struggled to reach the top level of the game. Think about how deeply ingrained Asians are absolutely killing it in table tennis. And this was because in the 50s, their chairman Mao declared it a national sport, and there was a lot of support going towards that direction. The same thing can be said of India today, with all of the encouragement their presidents give their chess players. This pattern is also similar to what we see in Latin America, a region that is deeply ingrained in soccer. So the pattern is glaring. The more a community values chess, the more kids play. And the more kids play, they get better. And the better they get, the more the community values it. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy that can shape generations of grandmasters. There's also the power of seeing someone who looks like you succeed. Role models can be game changers. If you see heroes who look like you lifting trophies, becoming world champions, earning recognitions, you are far more likely to imagine yourself in that role. Sometimes, we all need someone to show us what is possible. Inspiration is definitely a powerful tool. And maybe this YouTube channel can be that spark. So please subscribe and let's build the role models of tomorrow together. For instance, when Vishy Anand became the world champion, the number of kids taking up chess in India exploded. And when Maurice Ashley became the first Black Grandmaster, there was also a surge of interest in chess among African American players. But sadly, just like when Tiger Woods made it in golf, the number of black people picking up the interest didn't keep climbing. The excitement was real, but the lack of infrastructure, investment, and support in black communities meant that most of that potential never had the chance to grow. To further stress this point, let's look at snow skiing, a sport overwhelmingly dominated by white athletes at the professional and Olympic level. Most champions come from wealthy nations with cold climate and easy access to snow. In those countries, skiing isn't just a pastime, it is embedded in the culture, supported by youth programs and abundant facilities. The sport is expensive, requires a lot of gear, training, and travel to slopes demands serious financial backing from families or communities if athletes are to reach the elite level. And this is the reason it is dominated by the white community. Even with this, it is not even only about money. Norway, for example, dominates cross-country skiing and speed skating simply because these sports are a way of life. Families ski and stake together, and kids start almost as soon as they can walk. Culture drives participation, and that circles back to the role model thing. When young people don't see anyone who looks like them in a sport, they are less likely to imagine themselves there. And this is not limited to only this type of sport or any expensive one. Other activities like tennis, archery, softball, and even soccer show similar patterns. It is always an intertwined mix of culture and economics that determines who plays and who rises to the top. Okay, so given all that, let's turn to the most controversial part of the whole puzzle: genetics. This is where things get really interesting and usually a little bit uncomfortable, especially when we talk about chess. It is advisable to be very careful here because the argument that different races have different genetics can lead to some terrible beliefs and ideologies. But at the same time, it will be silly to pretend there are no physical differences between people from around the world. We should all be smart enough to look at that without getting too weird about it, especially when asking whether genetics has anything to do with chess at all. So, the question: are there genetic differences between populations that might contribute their performance or non-performance in certain sports? Yes, of course, but it is complicated. Overall, there are actually more genetic diversity within groups than between them. Research indicates that approximately 85% of human genetics variation exists within populations, while only about 15% account for the differences between populations. Still, that doesn't mean there aren't generic variations that cluster. Research have found that genetics can sometimes give athletes an edge in specific sports. For example, many world-class sprinters with West African ancestry tend to have a greater share of fast-twitch muscle fibers, the type of muscles best for powerful, explosive movements, even though it tires quickly. That makes them naturally suited for short sprints. In a 2010 paper in the International Journal of Design and Nature suggested that black runners may have a small speed advantage, about 1.5%, because their center of mass sits slightly higher than that of white runners. The idea was that this lets them lean forward and move between strides more quickly. While it sounds scientific, many experts doubt that such a simple explanation really holds up. Another theory, also debated, links the sickle cell trait in common West African populations to a higher share of fast-twitch muscle fibers. But again, the evidence for that that claim is weak. On the other hand, consider how few elite sprinters come from the Asian population. Some researchers think this may be linked to body proportions. In general, shorter legs compared to torso length could make sprinting less efficient. But these are only theories, and testing them is difficult. And in all of these conversations around genetics, we also have to factor in epigenetics, which defines how lifestyle, environment, and even stress can switch certain genes on or off, influencing performance in complex ways. For example, imagine two identical twins. They have the same DNA, but one grows in a stressful populated city with poor nutrition, while the other grows up in a calm, healthy environment with good food and regular exercise. Even though their genes are similar, their bodies may function very differently. The stressed twin might develop higher risk of heart disease or diabetics, and the healthier twin might show stronger immunity and better recoveries from injuries. Why? Because their environment and lifestyle turned on or turned off certain genes, and that is how epigenetics plays a huge role in performance as well. The idea behind all of this is that while genes may provide a starting advantage, their actual effects depends on things like diet, training, and even mindset. This may help explain why athletes from certain regions rise to the top. It's not only about genetics, but about how these genes work together with lifestyle and environment. It's also worth remembering that genes which give an advantage in one sport can be a drawback in another. The body build that makes someone an exceptional marathon runner is very different from the build needed for an offensive tackle in football. So when we look at science, there is no simple clear-cut answer. The relationshihips are complex and still unsettled. Yet, even with all the uncertainty, some traits do appear more often in elite athletes from certain groups than in others. Now, let's leave athletics and stretch this genetics conversation into chess. The argument goes something like this. If intelligence has genetic component and chess is a game of intelligence, there may be certain races are naturally better at it. On the surface, this sounds neat, but it falls apart almost quickly. First, studies on IQ and genetics are far more controversial than most people realize. Intelligence is incredibly complex. It is shaped by culture, environment, education, nutrition, and even stress levels. And when you actually test chess performance, it doesn't line up neatly with race at all. The best players come from places with strong chess culture and infrastructure, not from some biological advantage. Second, the idea that the brain size or biology explains chess talent has been debunked over and over and over again. Grandmasters do not have bigger brains than anyone else. They have better pattern recognition built from thousands of hours of practice. What separates Magnus Carlsen or Vishy Anand from the rest of us isn't DNA. It is training, opportunity, and obsession with the game. Throughout history, even great champions have made controversial claims that chess talent is tied to biology. For example, Bobby Fischer once suggested that Jews were naturally stronger at chess, while Garry Kasparov made dismissive remarks about whether women could ever match up men at the very top. But if those statements were true by any fraction, the evidence would back them up, but they don't. Take the Polgar sister for example. Their father believed genius wasn't born, it was trained, and from early childhood, he immersed his children in chess, and all three of them became world-class players. Judith Polgar even went on to break into the world's top 10, defeating multiple world champions along the way. Their story is living proof that chess greatness comes from training, culture, and opportunity, and not DNA. Of course, all of this raises the question, should we as a society be trying to change the racial makeup of competition, especially in chess? Certainly, making every sport financially accessible to all kids is a worthy goal, but if you only look at the colors of those who win or those who play, things get more complicated. Sports are full of exceptions to every rule. Yes, some groups may dominate certain sports, but that isn't inherently good or bad, just a fact with fascinating cultural and historical reason behind it. Chess works the same way. If you scan the elite ranks today, you will notice clusters of players from Russia, India, or China, not because of biology, but because of culture, investment, and opportunity. When a society pours resources into chess, champions emerge, and when young players see role models who look like them achieving greatness, they follow suit. In the end, the makeup of chess at the top isn't written into anyone's gene. It is written in the opportunities they are given and the communities that nurture them. Please subscribe now and join us on this search